My name is Darson Grantham, and on this episode, we're just going to talk about Gary Keller, who is the leader, starter, owner of Keller Williams. He did a vision speech for all of the agents last week at one of the big conferences we call the Family Reunion. Jared was actually there, and so Gary just does a really good job articulating the housing real estate industry and what things matter and what things don't. So we're going to go through that.
And I think I want to add as well that Gary was just also named the real estate most influential person of the year in our industry as well. So when he talks, people tend to listen, and we're just going to kind of break down his vision speech and what he foresees in the real estate industry going forward.
Yep, and I guess not to beat that concept down too much, it's actually the reason I personally came to Keller Williams is when I hear Gary talk, he has a way of explaining business and real estate and people in a way that I have not heard anyone else kind of talk. So that's something that I, pulled very tightly to, pulled very close to. So
and I want to add as well from the commercial side of things real quick, not to keep beating this dead horse, but I have plenty of commercial agents that are friends and other industry and other offices, other actually brokerages who have said that Gary Keller is a genius in breaking down just the agency, real estate in general, and it applies to residential, it applies to commercial, it applies to business. He has a way of applying business practices to real estate.
Yep. I mean, he basically wrote the book. It's called Millionaire Real Estate Agent. It's the blueprint that every real estate agent broker has created off of, right?
Right.
He created it before there was anything else, and now everyone just rips and duplicates from him because that's what good business people do. They R&D, they rip and duplicate someone that has modeled something very good. So he's kind of the godfather of it.
And to tie back off, this all ties back into giving credibility to Gary in his speech here. But the MREA, at the end of the day, when you break it down, it's just four principles, four practices that really entail every business. Every business has to have these four models, whether it's an agent or whether it's an investor. If you're a millionaire real estate agent investor,
yep.
It's the blue book, whatever it may be. All of them follow the same four basic business principles.
Yep.
So again, he's really good at taking real estate and breaking down to business. So with that, I think let's jump into what we want to talk about.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to, and typically we'll do news and market data for right now, but we're just going to wipe that right now, and we're just really going to focus on this vision speech. So the first slide that I want to talk about is he posted, and I would post these, but I don't think it's legal for me to post these yet since they're technically not in the public views. But he pointed out affordability and the affordability crisis, I guess you could say, in the United States.
Yep.
And he talked a lot about Canada too, but we're just going to talk about the United States in my opinion.
Yep.
There's just different factors that go into it. But the affordability factor right now, I think it's at 16%. 16% of someone's wages go toward the mortgage, principal and interest.
Right.
That number just for example, in 2008 when shit hit the fan and crashed, it was at 30, right? So if you think about someone's paycheck, 30% of that was the average that went toward a mortgage and insurance.
Yep.
That's crazy. Now it's at 16%.
So
in the past, just for example, excuse me, I said that wrong. In 08, it was not 30%. In 08, it was 15% also. 15, 16%.
So I think,
and it's been on that level.
So this is something really interesting because one thing we hear a lot in commercial, and especially the multifamily world right now, is affordability. It is the hot button. If you want to fill a room, talk about how you're going to make real estate and affordable. That just seems to be a very hot topic. So I love when we have this stat out here saying that actually real estate's actually more affordable than it has been in the last 20, 30 years.
Yep.
It's actually very affordable. Now, we need to ask why it's more affordable, and we'll get into it later, but the answer is interest rates.
Yep.
And we're looking at just the mortgage and interest right now. But real estate by itself is very, very affordable right now. Now, again, we're just talking about the mortgage and interest. Let's also clarify that. We're not talking about the taxes, the insurance, all the utilities, all the upkeep, et cetera. But one thing I know Gary talked about from being in the speech was the true affordability crisis is in the first-time homebuyer sector. If you look at just first-time homebuyers, I believe then it goes up to 25, 30%.
Yep.
So what we're really seeing is the growth of the haves and the have-nots.
Yep.
And ironically, it's another gentleman said this conversation 20 years ago, which you and I both love as well, Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
He kept saying the shrinking middle class, and you're going to have the haves and the have-nots. So if we look at the affordability, we're really affordable right now unless you get to the first-time home buyer market. And I think what we can take away from this, at least from my perspective as well, for any of my clients out here watching multifamily, is a lot more tenants, a lot more people that are going to rent apartments because they cannot afford to be that first-time home buyer, which is the one being squeezed out the most.
Yeah, I think it's just fascinating. When I got into buying investment properties, my mindset was, who would rent? Well, it doesn't make any sense to rent. And that was in 2012 is when I really started thinking about it. And why would anyone rent? It makes no financial sense. Well, some people don't have the choice. Some people want to rent. The more and more we get down the affordability issue is the more and more people have to rent.
Right.
So one of the things I took away from this slide is from 2010 or 2008 to now, it's been anywhere from 14 to 16% is the affordability, like the average affordability.
Right.
How has that changed with the prices, right? Prices have doubled or tripled since then, but the affordability is still the same, right? So like to me, when people are all saying, housing prices have gone up, they've gone crazy, like no one can afford this. When in reality, the average, it's still 16%.
Well, I think, so the answer to that is a couple of things we're thinking about here. And one thing I can dive in maybe in another subject here is this new topic we've talked about is renter by choice and renter by necessity. Okay. And that's another topic another time. But we're going to see the growth of the renter by choice, which at the end of the day means B and C class, generally speaking, multifamily housing product types, the working class. But I think the answer to that, from my perspective, is two things. Is one, if we look at 08, 09, we were just coming off a recession. The Federal Reserve dropped rates slowest I've ever been seen. We were seeing 4.25%, 4.5% interest rates. Yep. Now we're seeing 3s. So we're even another point lower than we were back then. And people say this isn't crazy, it's unaffordable. But we also have rampant inflation right now. So a house that was costing $200,000 back then now costs $300,000, not only because it's necessarily more valuable, it's just the inflation of the dollar, the amount of debt we've created as a country. So
the amount of money that we as consumers have in our pockets to go buy something.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's what inflation is.
Right. So I mean, that's the interesting part is everybody says this is unobtainable. This is who can pay this? The answer is obviously almost anybody. Yep. We're the exact same as we were. We've seen a lower interest rate and we've seen more inflation. And at the end of the day, we're almost the exact same as we were 10, 12 years ago in terms of the affordability of real estate.
Okay, so we've kind of beat that horse. So we'll go on to my next slide that I wanted to point out was it's income by sector. So the sectors are, you have financial services, professional business services, wholesale trade, construction, manufacturing, education, transportation, retail, leisure, and hospitality. The one that I wanted to point out on was leisure and hospitality. Their year-over-year growth is 10% in wages, right? So if you think about that segment of the industry, that leisure and hospitality, like they don't have workers. Right. There's no one there. Like I heard that there are hotels that aren't doing room service because they have no one to hire. They're trying to raise wages as fast as they can.
Right.
So that fact, like there's no supply chain issue there, right? Like everyone wants to blame the supply chain. There's not a supply chain issue with leisure and hospitality that I know of. It's straight up people left that industry and they found that it's much easier to make money in other industries.
So at the end of the day, all we're talking about is, I'm going to break this all down, my opinion, is two things: supply and demand. At the end of the day, that's all it is. All
of people.
Of people, exactly. Of people, of people, of jobs. So here's the thing. Right now, there's a huge demand for workers in the hospitality sector. The supply is low because people have either been laid off or been paid to stay at home, or they've left and went to other sectors, which just happens, it's just a natural thing. Yep. So the demand is there, supply is low, prices have to rise. Now, on the flip side of that's interesting is that with the birthplace of all of us having college degrees anymore as well, there's a huge supply of college degree educated people who want to go to professional services or some kind of service-based, administration, whatever it may be. Yep. And we're actually seeing that wage growth slow down, probably.
4.5 or 4.9, and it's 5. So 4.9 in 2020, and in 2021 it was 5. So like zero wage growth in professional services. And
here's the funny part is that I'm going to actually take this for a second real quick here and talk about construction. This actually ties really well into our last slide, all about affordability.
It's doubled. 2020 to 21, construction income growth or wage growth is doubled.
Yeah, so here's the thing though. Here's what people forget about. I've seen this very, very clearly in our market in Des Moines, Iowa even. People forget how bad the 08-09 crisis was on construction. It wiped out entire construction industries and developers and builders. And here's the thing, when those builders came back, they said, we're not going to build spec homes anymore. We're going to build only custom homes because we're afraid, because we got wiped out last time. Yep. There are electricians and plumbers who have said, we got wiped out, and now we're not going to get ahead of our skis. We're afraid. They still remember like it's yesterday. I still talk to them.
I talk to them a lot too.
Exactly. So this is what is creating that price growth as well, because we can't create the supply of housing needed to meet the demand of the millennials who are moving into that thing. Creates inflation as well. We're also seeing, again, this is why we're seeing wage growth in the construction field so much compared to the white collar. We all have degrees anymore. Why do we go to the professional field? Construction's growing so much because there's a huge supply and demand issue, and that's what's driving this, inflation, these higher prices, 100%. And if you ever want to test it, go out and talk to any home builder that was still building in 08, 09, 07. Anybody that was building them, and ask them about how they handled it, and I almost will guarantee you get the same response. This is also why we're seeing rent growth so much. Not just because of what we're seeing in inflation and rent, but we're seeing the fact that you can't build anything with, of course, supply chain issues, but there's not enough labor there to support that, so we can't build it cheap enough.
They can, it's just not as fast, right?
Right.
So like one of the things that I brought up last week, and I don't know if we talked about it on this is just like new homes. How long have they sat on the market?
I feel like
we talked
I think it was
about
one day.
Yeah, no, there isn't.
There isn't.
There's
Yeah,
zero.
you mentioned this, yes.
Like I want to know, and I asked. So there's a guy. His name's Les Solgrove, and he tracks the Des Moines real estate data, new home builds, resales really well. I said, Les, is there any way that we can track new home builds and see how many of them are sitting on the market?
Right.
And he's like, there's so much bad data in the MLS systems, there's no real way to track it. And so like, I'm trying to figure out how I can put a pinpoint on that to like, how do I call the top 10 home builders every month, and just say, how many new homes do you have built that are sitting on the market not filled?
Right.
I know that it's zero right now, but when that answer is, we have 5 that are sitting there that are not, no one's bought them.
Right.
That's when I'm like, let's.
And I think all this actually ties back into Gary Keller's speech and what I just said right now. So if you talk to any of the older construction owners, developers, home builders, they're all not getting over their skis. So what this means, though, is that there's a whole new generation of home builders and construction builders and contractors who have never had a downturn, never had depression. So they're starting to build as much as they can because all they're seeing is these good times. They're seeing no days on the market. Let's build. That's not a bad thing. But what Gary Keller talked about in his vision speech is that, are we in a bubble? Because we've seen this huge affordability. We've seen 18% price jumps in housing across the market the last 2 years in a row almost, 10, 12% each year. And Gary said, are we in a bubble? And he said, no, but we could be getting that level. Because again, what we're seeing is these new home builders who have never seen things, all they're seeing is all the good times. So they're saying, let's ramp as fast as we possibly can. Let's start, speeding this up so we can meet that demand, which could create a bubble. It's not right now, but they have never seen the downtime. So they're starting to lean into their skis further to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, it reminds me of like, you have 2 balloons, right? You have a small balloon that's like a water balloon, and you're blowing it up, and you're like, it's about ready to pop. And you have another balloon that's the big balloon, right? And you're blowing it up, and it's the same size, but it still has tons of room to grow.
Right.
I feel like we are that bigger balloon that's just waiting. Like, it might be, it's bigger than the water balloon,
right?
But it's not anywhere close to popping yet. And like that'd be where I'm seeing there's no data that says like this is stopping anytime soon. Not now. Gary's vision speech is very macro, right? I think that every real estate market is micro. So Des Moines is very much like there's not any signs that are leading that there is some slowdown in the economy. There's probably small towns or other areas that have issues that might not be either as good or as bad or whatever as other local markets.
Actually, I want to so this one actually ties in our market in really nicely here. And what's been happening a lot, I've talked about this, I know in previous, about the Des Moines market and the influx of new money. And what we've seen a lot in the multifamily apartment space is in the past there was always the primary markets, the New York, the LA, the Washington, D.C., Dallas, Chicago, whatever it may be. And the primary markets always affected the tertiary markets, or secondary markets, Seattle's, Denver's, whatever it may be. Secondary went to tertiary. Tertiary was the Minneapolis, the Kansas City, and then it went into the final markets, the Des Moines, the Omaha, et cetera, right? And it was always that progression. What we've seen happen a lot, especially since COVID, is many of these investors in the A markets have said, let's forget going to B markets, let's just go straight to the tertiary markets. Let's forget going from primary to secondary, let's just go straight, get the money. And the reason why is we have this thing called the internet now, and Zoom that's made everything easier to play. And I want to talk about it a little bit because in 08, 09, it was still new. The internet was still very new. I don't care what anybody says, it was still very new.
Yep. The data on the internet was not new. The data that was available on the internet was not there.
Yes,
not compared to what
and
it is
there was
now.
no way we could have shut down in 08, 09, even 07, like we did with COVID, and had our economy still support ourselves,
It would have
right?
been a heavy crash.
So this is why when 08, this is why I say it's for a reason, is that when 08, 09 happened, you saw our Des Moines market bottom in 2011. If you just look at our stats,
Yeah.
2009 was our bottom. It took 2 years for us to feel it. My theory is things have gotten faster because of what we just talked about. Now these markets from the primary New York City investors are coming to Des Moines. Whenever this bubble does pop, and it will eventually, like everything comes to an end eventually, it's going to happen so much faster at such a rapid pace that you're not going to have as much time to react to it as you might have in the past.
But like,
even though I agree, all the market's different.
yeah, it's funny that you say pop, right? Because
Right.
when I hear pop, I think like from blown up balloon to zero.
Right. It's true.
Which is not true.
You can sell
right?
air, you can sell arrow, right? Put a little hole in it.
Yeah. So like Des Moines, 08 is when like everyone knew that it was crashed then, right?
Right.
Didn't they?
Right.
I was in college and like the job that I had, I mean, I could tell.
Right.
People were getting laid off. Like it was mass chaos.
Yeah.
But the Des Moines market didn't hit bottom until
Till 2011.
2 years late, 3 years
3 years
later.
later, 3 years
right?
later, 11, yeah.
So like a crash doesn't mean it's over overnight.
Right.
It means if you're an investor in the area, you have to make a decision immediately.
Right.
Or if you're an owner in the area, do I want to sell now
Right.
or do I want to wait the 10-year game plan?
Right. So, I mean, I love the idea of talking about the balloon. And one thing that I always like to relate to as well, another analogy I've heard with the economy and our real estate, not just balloon, is think of like a car on the interstate or like even a train. Like, understand as a car on the interstate, if you're going 100 miles an hour, you can go 120, you could back down to 90, or you could back down to 20, or you could totally hit the brakes and just stop.
Yeah.
So understand that we could still, we're kind of in a balloon right now. We're seeing some inflation air. We're seeing low interest rates. We could probably let some of that air out and just slow down and still be okay.
Yeah.
And that may release the pressure of the balloon. That's why the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. They're going to try to control that to slow things down. So are we on a bubble? Maybe, maybe not. But we could potentially.
We're in a bubble.
But
Does
you
it
just-
still have time to grow or is it going to start getting smaller?
And again, like a balloon. If a balloon.
More of a balloon than a bubble.
But if you use a balloon, and as an example, you could still blow that balloon a little bigger.
Yeah.
Or you could also let a little air out
Yep.
and just slow down, or just slow the growth.
Yep.
So these are all things that are tying into the equation. But I think at the end of the day, if you really boil it down to a supply and demand issue, I'm gonna tie back personally, I think, is that a lot of construction, a lot of home builders are still afraid to build and get over their skis too much. There's still a lot of memories of that.
Well, and they have to work with banks too, right?
Yep,
And banks were affected then.
And
also.
banks have not forgotten it. Banks are still very
Right. So you have to go through two levels of scared people
Right.
that were hard impacted. You
and,
know what I mean?
And the millennial generation is the largest population of people since the baby boomers in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
The demand is still great. So I still see a lot of room for growth in the housing sector and even potentially in just real estate in general. Now, commercial jobs drive commercial real estate, but so
Yeah.
we can go in that a little differently. But for the houses, people living in multifamily and the affordability crisis, I see a lot of room still in those sectors. Now, commercial jobs drive commercial, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
But for multifamily and for housing, there's still a huge demand there, and the supply cannot keep up with it. So I still think we got good times going forward.
And it might change next week.
Yeah.
Like Gary said in the speech, like this was before the war, if you will,
The war in
for
Ukraine.
and Russia, right? Like he said, you know, if this happens, it could change everything.
Yep.
Well, it happened. Hasn't changed everything yet.
Yet.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've got a few more slides here, but let's just wrap this up. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we've kind of talked at least briefly what the vision was about, what our
Right.
opinions are on it, and you know how you as an investor, you as a home buyer, a business person needs to just think about your philosophy, your planning,
Right.
who you align your horses with.
The biggest thing I think we can talk about, and it's kind of your next slide there, and I want to just give a cautionary tale, I think, to anybody out there, just my thoughts, is if you looked at inflation and real wage growth for what they can purchase in 1980 to 2000 in terms of cars, gas, home, and just the general flow of money, inflation, all that, almost everything's more expensive except housing. Housing was actually cheaper now than it was 40 years ago. And the reason I want to talk about that the most is that, again, how is that possible? How is a house that's average sale now of $300,000 or so, a new home?
Yep. So just for perspective, from 1989, the real change of cars is up 30%, of gas is up 56%, the price of houses is up 58%, the mortgage affordability is down 24%.
And see, and this is what I want to talk about the most, is that There's only one answer for that, and it's interest rates. It's low interest rates are driving the affordability of housing. And it's any good car salesman knows. You always ask, what can you afford monthly payments? It's the first question they ask. So this is why everybody needs to keep their eye on the Federal Reserve interest rates and what's happening with that, because interest rates are driving much of the economy right now and the affordability. In my personal opinion, the interest rates and the low interest rates are what's driving most of this. And if those interest rates go up too fast, too quickly, that's gonna be one of the biggest things that'll either cause the air to come out of that balloon, either slowly or fast.
Yeah.
So I'd be very, very cautious of watching that right now.
Like, I listen to a lot of real estate economy podcasts, YouTube videos. I study it a fair amount, no expert. Everyone says that though.
Right?
But what's too fast? Is a quarter too fast? Is 50 cents too fast? Or 50% or 50 basis points too fast? Like, what is too fast? You know what I mean? So there is no answer.
No.
And the Fed now, not to beat the Fed dead horse, but like they're basically trying to affect markets by saying what they're going to talk about.
Right.
Right? So if they say they're going to talk about something, they're thinking markets will change. Markets will slow down. They'll take the foot off the gas because we might be doing something. Then when they actually do something, it's what is the market already priced in, what they said they're going to do, right?
They're using essentially words and slander almost.
Instead of the actual, like, what actually happens.
They're using the threat of a stick to actually, without using the stick to get things to
and
where
we're like
they want to be.
little, trainable dogs that are like, oh shit, that might actually happen.
Right.
So let's slow down.
Now, here's the interesting part, though. I will say, and this is something that got brought to me last week, because I'm in commercial. In commercial, we watch interest rates, the arbitrage, the value of cap rates like a hawk. I mean, interest rates, at some form or fashion, we won't go into details, affect cap rates. And he made a great point. He said, commercial, yes, but the consumer market will not be affected because consumers can still afford their house. And at the end of the day, he goes, consumer market is bigger than commercial market by far.
Yeah.
So rates can go up, and this is where it'd be good for you, great for housing. They're going up, they can still afford it, but commercial is going to slow down a little bit. That's where our sectors act a little differently.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, because I kind of dabble with both, but like, there isn't yet a pullback on commercial demand.
No, there's not.
Either.
There's not. But I can just say that with what he said, he opened my mind up, is that consumer market will still drive the economy more than the commercial market will.
Yeah, they aren't linear.
Commercial cannot afford for rates to go up drastically because it'll put a lot of cold water on our commercial market, I think.
Yeah.
With that being said, because we've seen a lot of thin margins in investors' appetite.
Yeah.
With that being said, I think consumers can handle the interest rate increase.
Oh, affordability, they absolutely can.
Like we just saw,
it's
affordability.
fact.
So this is very, very interesting, which this could all, again, take some air out of the balloon, slow things down, maybe commercial slows down, residential stays hot, and we get that kind of balancing factor rather than everything just being rampant hot like it has been the last 18, 20 months since COVID kind of dissipated.
Yeah.
As a final, I guess, if we wanted to have in the market news, as things that we've been watching happen the last week, obviously the Ukraine-Russia crisis is changing daily. So by next week we'll know more about that. As we're going into March now, when this is being recorded, we're seeing interest rates going to go up next month, and it's kind of those things that
the 10th, right? March
Gary
10th?
Gary Keller said in his vision speech that two things could derail the economy: the Federal Reserve interest rates and a crisis in Ukraine, and both are coming to fruition. So stay tuned.
At this point, from everything I'm hearing, 0.25% interest rate is what it should
Pretty
be,
much, yep.
right? If it's not that, whether it's nothing or it's 50 basis points, like either of those will be really bad, really good.
Right.
If there's nothing, shit's going to go really well.
Right.
If it's a quarter, it's kind of already priced into the market, right?
Baked in.
There for a while before the Russia-Ukraine war, I believe the quarter 50 basis points was like 96. No one knew what was going to be
before
decided.
Ukraine, Russia, I think the market was predicting a half-point raise to like 95% credibility. What they thought was kind of some terms I've heard. Some of that 90% tile, they were betting a half-point raise. Okay. Since Ukraine, Russia, they've kind of pulled back to that quarter-point raise. I will say, something I've been watching here as well. This is just in general, as we talked about kind of earlier for anybody watching. It hasn't affected real estate yet. Ukraine, Russia has not affected it yet. We both said that. But also, let's understand the stock market itself is also basically characteristic of the economy and how people feel. And
it hasn't always been that way.
It hasn't always been that way,
but
it does. It does show
right
people
now.
how they feel. And when Ukraine and Russia first came out, that we were having issues over there, and there was a war taking place, the market dropped. But it recovered almost all of it within the first day or so, which tells you that people are still finding faith in the underlying fundamentals of what we just talked about: the supply, the demand, the interest rates, the affordability, inflation tapering off, all these things. So they're finding enough things to be positive about. Now, the question is that are they being irrationally exuberant, or are they just being exuberant? And that's the question that everybody has to ask.
We'll just continue to watch.
Yep.
So anyway, we'll wrap this up. You can find more information from me. Again, my name is Darson Grantham, a real estate agent here at Keller Williams. And you can email me, dgrantham@kw.com. Find me on TikTok, Instagram. Find me on YouTube. Any of those channels, I'll be happy to interact, answer questions, field comments.
Yep. And Jared Huseman here, president of the Catalyst team. You can find all social media pretty much through either Jared Huseman or the Catalyst team. We do have a YouTube page, Facebook page, LinkedIn, Twitter. All of it will be either my name, Jared Huseman, or the Catalyst team, K-A-T-A-L-Y-S-T.